Peoples of the worldwide federated internet. What's good? Here we go back again to the Book of Leviticus, still with our intro. I think this will be the last week of intro. You will see as we go over some different topics why we have taken so long to deal with an introduction to the book. We didn't necessarily have to take this long, but we all have a bunch of thoughts about the book, what it means, the time of the book, the impact of the book, and we felt it was necessary to unpack those things at the onset before we actually start diving in a verse by verse. So forgive some of the breaks. We've been having incredible technical difficulties on my end and on Don's end trying to get this thing recorded and backed up. Hopefully we'll be able to work out some of these issues. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into this. Here we go. Back again, the Book of Leviticus. We are still in semi-intro mode. So I don't know if y'all want to begin going through these verses in chapter 1 again, or if you have some more you want to say leading into chapter 1.
I've got one kind of general thought question or something up for discussion, whatever, is kind of how we're approaching this. Do we have any guideline to it that's going to keep us, reined in? For example, this one book I'm reading says, the one great principle of interpretation, which we keep before us, is the apostolic method and practice. This is the key we have used. And he said something else a little bit later, just like it almost seemed like an outline as to how to understand the book, but I can't quite place it right now.
I would say, I don't know if you'd agree, Darius, I would say the key to staying, I guess, focused in this book and any other book is, where is Christ in this book?
Hmm. Hmm. Um. I mean, I think I could agree with that statement. Not, but I think I think that as I look at the book, I see a great deal of New Testament things, like that we probably could hit. But I think the primary for me has been just focusing on what it says, right? And then after looking at what it says, then maybe seeing some applications there. But for the most part, you know, first just understanding why the book exists, what is it saying, and how is it, how are the Israelites, how do they see it, and then understanding how they see it to help us understand how we may look at it. But I see your point, Khalif. I don't want to disagree with that statement. I just don't know that I take any book outside of what it was written for.
What it
You know what I'm
actually
saying?
says. No, that's
Yeah.
that's a good point. And I'll say something I mentioned off camera, the quote from Chuck Missler, our problem is not life after death, it's life after birth. And obviously this book happening after the Exodus, okay? You've exited Egypt. God has saved you from the Egyptians. He has given you guidelines, right? He's given you what is referred to as the 10 commandments in Exodus chapter 20. He's given you case law in, the subsequent verses, different things to do or not to do, guidelines, not necessarily in 100%. This is all you're going to deal with, but here's a guideline for how you deal with these things. And now we get to the book of Leviticus. Okay, what do we do with sin? What do we do with our relationship with God and others? So I think that's probably a good way, in my humble opinion, to look at the book of Leviticus.
And just to go back to last time, I'm going to do it today anyway. Uh, I'll quote this real quick from Andrew Bonar. We search into these types, and let me stop there because he's saying, and I think most commentaries do say that the Book of Leviticus and a whole lot of uh, the Old Testament is full of types and the metaphors and figures to point to Christ. So let me start that again. So let's see here. Where there we go. We search into these types in the belief that Christ is the center truth of Revelation, and surely no principle is more obviously true. Uh, and he goes on to kind of quote out some of those things and show New Testament references for that. Um, I said I was going to quit doing that. Anyway, the other thing is that I've been in just Bible reading, going through, and just this last week, uh, the last couple of weeks, I guess, the Book of Exodus, and from chapter 12, where the Passover is. Was that this week? Did I? Because I don't. That was on the 25th and 26th. I was reading that, and I read it a couple of times, just in daily reading. But here yesterday, chapter 25 of Exodus, it starts out. It says, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, that they bring me an offering of every man that giveth it willingly with his heart. Ye shall take my offering." I kind of stopped right there as I was reading it. I was like, wait a minute, are we talking Leviticus chapter number 1? It's not, because it goes on and it's saying blues and purples, scarlet, and all this stuff for the tabernacle, of course, right? But it just struck me real quick as that. And the other thing that was striking me was the way that Exodus is describing the Passover, and it's talking about it like it goes from present, like as if they were right there in the moment, and then it jumps forward to like sometime later on, saying this is the memorial and all that, right? I don't know if y'all have read it recently, then you might have noticed it, but it if you go back and read it, it's really interesting to see just the way that it's written, kind of looking back, and it's not always right there in the moment. For instance, and this is something I'm still trying to figure out though. When uh Moses is leaving the presence of Pharaoh, Pharaoh's saying, leave, get out of my face, not to leave the land, but get out of my face. Don't, if you look upon me again, you're going to die. And so Moses said, yep, you're right, I'm gone. And then God speaks and says, I'll visit, this uh Passover, that time, that the death of the firstborn upon Egypt. And so he's still there, and he's talking, and he says, about midnight, the Lord's going to pass through and kill all the firstborn. So is he talking that night? Because the next chapter's saying, this is the first month. Take a lamb, lay it up until the 14th day of the month, and you're going to kill it on the 15th day of the month. Or is he speaking that in retrospect and saying it's actually the 15th day of the month at that time? And he says about midnight, the Lord's going to pass through, and they've got to get everything ready, before that midnight, right there. So I'm still looking at it and saying, I'm not sure whether he meant that night when he was speaking to Pharaoh, or he just said at midnight it's going to happen, and it still took, 2 weeks basically. But I'm inclined toward it happened that night, and then he's describing how the memorial is going to be, throughout their, ages. Um, but anyway,
I'll have to read through that again. Yeah, I wonder. I wonder if anyone heard it at all, if it was just, and that's not really, not to say that that's anything super duper relevant, but just something I noticed offhand as I was listening to a few different things about it.
I would say to you, Khalif, man. I mean, you bring up one of the, if I'm hearing you correctly, one of the questions I ask myself. I think about Samuel, I think about Elijah, and I think about Moses. And Moses really different, a slight bit different, because even if they didn't hear God speak, they at least saw some things, right?
mhm.
But I often wonder, like, and we see a snippet of this, like we see a snippet of of of, of some of the Levites who were not selected to the priesthood, Kohath, I think, and his family, who were a bit jealous of Moses, seemed like question, is God only speaking to you? Like, is God not, are you the only one he speaks to? Almost, let me get to my statement. My statement would be, man, that had to be very tough to live in a situation where only one man heard God's voice.
Right.
And then he gave out what God said, and you had to listen to it and follow it. And I think that is a very, very humbling and difficult situation. And I don't know that any of us would be any better than the children of Israel in that environment.
You're getting to the exact point that I've been thinking for a while. That's the exact point I was thinking. And here's the thing. When people didn't listen, well, how do they know that Moses is actually, you know, saying or speaking to them what God has spoken to him? Well, we see the results. When they don't obey, things start happening. and not in a good way.
Moses gets mad and angry at the children of Israel, and he smites the rock twice. He wasn't speaking for God at that point.
No.
Right? And Elijah is cowering down in some cave, afraid to come out. He not representing God at that point.
Right. God is only me.
Get up. It's 500 of us ain't bow to need to bear.
Right.
So what I guess what I'm saying is
7,000.
7,000, yeah. And then you looking at Samuel. Samuel comes up. I mean, he got some issues with his children. You know what I'm saying? So, but imagine you going to a man, you're an anointed king, and you tell him, "Oh yeah, you didn't. What's this bleeding of the sheep?" You know what I'm saying?
Right.
You know, and the king is like, "Look, I mean, everything good." No, it's not good. God don't tell Saul it ain't good. God tells Samuel it ain't good.
Right.
Samuel then that's his own. And I can imagine if I'm Saul, like, man, Samuel, you always come on with bad news, dude. Like, everything good. If God was upset, then he would have did something right here. I can imagine that if I was that guy. You know what I'm saying? And I can imagine that we do that a great deal in our lives today. But I don't know. I do struggle with that thought. Like, here go Jesus walking around saying, "I'm he." Man, boy, that's got to be tough to hear a man saying that he is the one that you've been waiting on. He ain't got no degree in nothing. He ain't one of the Pharisees. Nobody don't like him. He's sitting around with these people who drink and who homeless, and he said, I'm telling you, man, these things are tough, 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 tough. If it wasn't for some of the miracles, and that's why I think it's frustrating for some involved, is because if it wasn't for the miracles, how would they even know?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So I do struggle with hearing the prophet. It's a prophet in the Book of Kings that comes and says to another prophet, "God told me to tell you don't go." After God told you to go.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I struggle with that myself, but I know that's not the real topic here. But yeah, I struggle with that thinking, especially now when you see Leviticus. God is now laying out what makes them separate from Him, and and Moses done picked his brother to be in charge of this thing.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It's like I don't know.
And he was challenged. I mean, Moses was challenged several times, but I think what you find, at least what I see going through the book of Leviticus thus far, is if I was inclined, like if I'm listening to Moses saying, okay, here's what God said. If I'm inclined to challenge Moses, I got to think about several things. I got to think about those people that were swallowed up by the earth. Got to think about that. Like, Moses said, God said this. We did our own thing, and the earth opened up and swallowed those people that wasn't listening. So I'm not sure I'm ready to challenge him. And two, he's saying, here's what God said. You want to be right with me. You want to fellowship with me after your sin. Here's what you do to atone for that sin. So then I would have to be thinking to myself, as I'm hearing him give out all of these things, okay, what happens if I don't atone for this sin? Well, now I got a problem with God. What happened the last time somebody had a problem with God after God told Moses what to tell us? Yeah, I don't want no smoke. That's what I would be thinking.
No. Listen, but they don't see it. I mean, in Leviticus yet, they don't see that. I mean, they don't see. We don't see that till Numbers, right? We don't see some of these things happen until Numbers. So God is laying out these things, Now, and then I want to just keep going back to Exodus, where when God redeems them out of Egypt, and now they at the Mount Sinai. They don't hear God's voice. All they hear is thundering,
right?
And earthquakes and dark, and all they see is darkness and smoke. And they say, hold up, not we don't want to talk to him, and we don't want him talking to us. You go talk to him, and we'll listen to what you got to say. Right? I mean, and in a sense, they go the rest of the Bible. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think Hebrews even hints at that. I mean, the book of Hebrews even hints at the fact that, we have not come to a mountain, burning with fire and, and thunderings and quaking. But yeah, I don't know. I think that the prophets end up speaking in that exact way. They didn't want to hear God, so God speaks through others. But again, I don't fully know. Pharaoh wouldn't, God could have easily said these things to Pharaoh, but he says them to Moses. And if you, Pharaoh, if somebody came to your house and said, Caliph, Brooklyn has to move out today, you probably looked at them like they crazy.
Yeah, you nuts.
Right. And just imagine this. Just imagine Moses coming and saying, look, let God's people go. God's people. I'm telling you, man, to me, the Bible is so real, but we lose it sometimes just because of, I think church has made some of these turn into stories of fiction, sometimes more than the stories of fact, by sometimes cartoonizing, and taking away some of the more real aspects of what has happened, but
Nah, you got a point. What would here's I guess my question as I'm reading through Leviticus chapter 1 again is, what would the children of Israel think when they hear about all of these different offerings? And I think we talked about this before, like this stuff wasn't new to them. Obviously, they would be familiar with the story of Adam, right? And they would be familiar of God slaughtering an animal and covering them with the skins. And then they would be familiar with Cain and Abel. So even though Moses is telling them what God said, and of course they just have to take that at face value, I think they do have some framework to judge, okay, well, this is not outside of the normal. This is not outside of the realm of what should be expected. And I think this is one of the reasons why when you see different offerings in the Bible, even before Exodus, like, well, how did they know to do this? Well, obviously they had some framework to judge. This is what is required. We have to give a sin offering. The sin offering wasn't like a brand new thing that they'd never seen before.
Oh, you start to sound like a cow.
And before we run into that,
let your
something
reform be revealed.
Something else I saw here is just in thinking about well, a couple of things, but I go into this. The time frame of the Book of Leviticus. Darius, you mentioned the first time we talked that it's like it's chronological, um, right? Exodus
Yeah,
goes into Leviticus and goes into
yeah,
Numbers.
yeah.
So in Exodus chapter 40, verse 17 says, "And it came to pass in the first month, in the second year of the first day of the month, that the tabernacle was reared up."
Hmm.
So the first month of the second year. And the book of Numbers starts out with, "And the Lord spake unto Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, in the tabernacle of the congregation, on the first day of the second month, in the second year after they were come out of the land of Egypt."
Okay.
So there's a month's time frame there that the book of Leviticus falls into, apparently. Like
Between
it all,
between is completion and the time where Moses now can enter in.
well, the rearing up of the tabernacle is the first day of the second month,
Hmm.
right? And then the book of Numbers starts out the first day of the. Let me say that again. It came to pass in the first month in the second year on the first day of the month.
Yeah,
And
first. Yeah.
then Numbers is the first day of the second month. So there's a from Exodus 40, which is right before Leviticus,
Hmm.
and when the tabernacle is reared up. So Leviticus chapter 1 is the Lord spake unto him out of the tabernacle. So it's obviously there to the book of Numbers. If it's chronological and it's all within that time frame, that's within a month,
Yeah.
is all I'm saying. Like it didn't happen necessarily in a day, could have happened in a day, but during that month is when Leviticus happens.
Yeah. But again, you can read Leviticus in about 3 hours. I mean,
Sure.
so I can imagine all of this happening in that one time frame. But we know it doesn't, right? Because we know that two of the priests breaks, Aaron's sons, they mess up. You know what I'm saying? And they die because of it.
That's in
And
Leviticus.
yes,
I know it's in Exodus, right?
but it's covered. Well, then I say that let me say it differently. It's covered in Leviticus as well.
Mentioned. Okay.
Yeah.
So Leviticus would kind of be intertwined with the end of Exodus, like somewhere in that period, the end of the
In
book
my
of.
mind, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Carly. Go ahead.
No, that's all I was saying. Like it's intertwined with the end of that book.
No, I mean, I if my memory's not incorrect, I thought that the who were the first sons of Aaron, that they died in Exodus, and that could have been before the tabernacle uh, was reared up.
Nadab in the Bible.
Yeah, Nadab and Abihu.
Yeah. And then in
I
Leviticus
may be
10,
just misremembering right now. That's all.
I didn't remember it being in Exodus, but it may have been in Exodus. I do know it's in Leviticus.
Yeah.
But when it speaks about it in Leviticus, it speaks about it as in like a current thing. And Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron,
Yeah.
took either of them his censer and put fire therein and put incense thereon and offered strange fire before the Lord, which he commanded them not.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
Leviticus 10,
So
1 and 2.
Okay.
so in a sense, it could have even been that parts of Leviticus, I mean, is given, and then parts are given at another point. Somebody is recounting. What I'm saying is Leviticus is not being written right now, right, like right at that moment.
Right.
Somebody is counting
What happened?
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Somebody is recounting those things in my mind. So they're not happening. I mean, they have they
Mhm.
they 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 they
It's not written
they,
in
they
real time.
counted for them chronologically, but it's not written right at that time.
Yeah.
That's my point.
That's kind of the impression I got as I read through the first 5 books, especially when you get to the last book, you kind of get the feeling just the way things are said. It's like, okay, so this was written at a different time.
And to take it one step
Yeah.
further, I think they didn't write it as Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, blah blah blah. I think they wrote it as just straight.
Yeah.
They started in the beginning and they ended up in Deuteronomy.
Which is why doesn't the Lord Jesus Christ refer to it as the Book of Moses, if I'm not mistaken?
The Book of Moses, right?
You
So
have to look that
I believe it goes Genesis to Deuteronomy, and that's the Book of Moses.
Well, I can agree. I think Exodus, there's some place where it says that Joshua, right, abode at the door of the tabernacle. Unless they had a tabernacle before the tabernacle, then they're not doing it chronologically. It's not chronologically speaking exactly in the book of Exodus for sure.
What you say? Joshua abode at the tabernacle?
Yeah, in chapter 33, verse 11 says that.
Yeah, but we know the tabernacle was there by that time because Moses.
Well, I'm just saying it's chapter 40 and verse number 17 that it says it came to pass the first day of the second year of the first day of the month that the tabernacle was reared up.
So I think this is how you could probably
That's the end of the book. So
I think this is how you could probably see it. It's just my guess going off, what we're all saying at this time. The book of Exodus is giving you the account of the children of Israel leaving Egypt, and there's a bunch of things going on in between. And somewhere in that time frame, these things in the book of Leviticus were laid down. So Leviticus can kind of be interwoven into the story of Exodus. Like somewhere in that story, these things were laid down. So it wasn't like Exodus happened and then Leviticus happened. It's like Exodus is going on. The things we're reading in the book of Leviticus happens somewhere during that time period.
okay. Or you could say it as Exodus, like Darius just said, is recounted, and there's various places where they're talking further on in history. I think my point, what I'm getting at is it appears that verse 17 is the rearing up of the tabernacle. That's the very beginning of that.
Well, look at Exodus 33, verse. It says,
11.
and Moses took the tabernacle and fixed it
Somewhere.
without the camp afar from the camp and called it the tabernacle of congregation. And it came to pass, everyone which sought the Lord went out unto the tabernacle of congregation, which was without the camp. And it came to pass when Moses went out unto the tabernacle, that all the people rose up and stood, every man at his tent door, and looked after Moses until he was gone in the tabernacle. We know he went in because this is where we get the story of him, his we know this story happens, but we know there's an event that happens after this where Moses is now outside of the tabernacle. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So right now, I don't think there's any sacrificing. Anything happened in Exodus. This is him making the tent, the tabernacle, based on what he saw in heaven. That's it. Because other than that, Joshua can't go in. I don't know what Joshua doing in there.
Well, he abode at the door of the tabernacle, is what it said. Well, no, it says departed not out of the tabernacle. Never mind. Yeah, and I'm not to the latter chapters of Exodus in my reading, and it actually is starting to get into what, or at least part of my reading is starting to get into the building of like the Ark of the Covenant and stuff like that. So where does it say the pattern?
So to both
There
of
it
your
is.
so to both of your points, if I'm this is kind of how I see it. I could be wrong about this. If I'm telling a story about something that happened in my house and I tell the overall story. But then there's something else that happened in the house. Here's the details of that thing that happened in the house, and here's how that played out. I wonder if Leviticus is kind of like that. Like, this all happened during that Exodus, but now we're getting the details of the tabernacle. And all right, let me try my
Let's cut back in, unless you're not ready now.
15th recording now. I'm recording.
All right. So, Darius, where did you say while we were having technical difficulties, it started saying tabernacle?
So I could say in Exodus 27:21, I think Khalif's position is more, accurate. It's just that we have
Okay.
stories mingled with stories, and and that is why we may see some what may they may have some inconsistencies that we think are there. But it's hard because, again, I haven't read through the book of Exodus in a minute. So trying to just recall some of these things, I'm not going to be really equipped to say I remember even the context of some of the stuff. Just hadn't combed through it like that in a while. So.
Right. And jumping off of what you just said, same thing that I'm kind of noticing is like around where I've been reading this last week has been where Moses goes up into the mount, right? And it's just starting in chapter 25 and 26 to talk about all these details. In fact, chapter 26, verse 13 talks about the tabernacle, and some other verses in there. So it's talking about what's going to be. And verse 40 of chapter 25 says, "And look that thou make them after their pattern which was showed thee in the mount." So he'd been up there for 40 days, and it doesn't even at this point tell the story. I think it's later. See, I'm getting mixed up because I'm not quite there yet with Exodus, but I don't recall getting into the story of him coming down and getting angry with the people. Yeah, that's a little bit later. Aaron in the calf and all that.
Yeah.
So just it's mentioning that maybe he's still up in the mount at this point in chapter 25 and so forth. But anyway, I'm in total agreement that he's telling the story and they're talking about things that happen with the tabernacle reared up. I think the point that I was getting to is it's still in verse 17 of the last chapter of Exodus says it's the first day of the first month of the second year that it's reared up. And then we see the book of Leviticus before Numbers tells us it's the first day
Oh,
of the second month.
I see what you're saying. You're saying that
Yeah.
that is the point that this event happens where all of this is
Right. At
laid out.
least Leviticus is being told in a month's period of time, no more than, I would
Yeah.
think. Not that the tabernacles, all, yeah, that's basically what I'm saying. And I guess that is some of the difficulties we do come into is that confusion of we're told something and it actually is happening later on than or because it's kind of hard to understand the last part of Exodus, not all of it, but several chapters, is them putting together these different pieces and all that, and describing that building. That was another thing that I noticed is like the somebody else pointed this out, and it may have been what Andrew Bonar's, or maybe it's somebody else, but we probably can all recognize this too. In Genesis chapter 1, God created the world in 6 days and describes it in one chapter and is done. And then in the book of Exodus, the description of the tabernacle takes chapter after chapter after chapter. And the description of these offerings is going to take, most of the book of Leviticus, not all of it. There's other things being said too. but just so much is provided in some things, and some things that we might think of as like maybe that's kind of important to know about. And people build entire ministries on Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2 and say this is not exactly, but you know what I'm saying, that they create that, and they elaborate greatly about these different things. Same thing with the flood is a chapter out of the Bible, or chapter and a half, 2 chapters, and there's so much to talk about that's there. And we kind of, uh, I mean, to our shame, perhaps we skip over a lot of this about something the Lord spends a lot of time talking about.
Hmm.
Why do we need to know? There's the two knops of the same, two branches of the same knop, and they're all of one piece of beaten gold, and there's just so much, and I
Yeah,
think we find it too tedious in our minds. We find it tedious, and we shouldn't. We should be spending more time. And I think some past preachers spend more time on stuff like that than than sometimes we do today. We like the shortcuts, I guess. Is part of. Go ahead, brother Darius.
no, no, no. I would say to you that, in just going through, Leviticus, it seems like there's a great deal of repeating one thing after another, just repeating the
Hmm.
same thing. Bring a bullock, do this, do that, and then every now and then, as we'll talk about when we get into the book, you'll notice one nuance, one difference. You know, like just one little word difference, and it changed the whole context of what's happening in that particular offering. So, just as an example, the differences between, the bullock offering and the lamb offering, where what part of the altar is, or a bullock and a bullock, but one is for the sin offering, and then the other one is for the burnt offering, and it looks like a burnt offering, but then it turns out that it has some differences. I mean, I think you're right, is that we do need to spend more time, slowing down in the book, but you know do we need more time slowing down, or do we need to be focused more as we read? Reading. I tend to like to read while something going on in the background. Now I block that out as I read. So I'm being honest with you. I read with something in the background, but I generally block that out. But are we taking time just to, I guess, I guess just just reading, understanding, focusing, declaring our hearts and mind, in a sense, worship it while reading. You know what I'm saying? And I think that'll help us see some of it more clearly. Again, you're right. I think in the sense that we're trying to get through the book as if it's some kind of marathon. Like I said, I always give time frames to books, like 3 hours for Leviticus, 45 minutes for Ephesians, an hour for Revelation, an hour for Romans. You know, I do that to say, hey, look, reading the Bible is not hard. In an hour, you can watch a movie. You know what I'm saying? In 45
Hmm.
minutes, you can watch 2 episodes of SpongeBob. You know, so reading the
SpongeBob
Bible
though.
is not. Huh?
I said SpongeBob though.
So I don't know. I agree with you, but I do. But again, the Bible is I mean, Leviticus. I mean, think about all my life, all my Christian life at least, read through Leviticus and like, man, this book sucks. Like, I don't know what the purpose of this book is in here. This, it's just a drag. And now in my life, it's like, man, this is actually one of the most beautifully written books out of all of the Bible. I mean, again, a lot of stuff comes with Christian growth too. With time spending, learning, understanding, hearing others people preach about it, talk about it. And even to the moment when we get started with this book, this may start somebody else's journey to seeing the benefits of the book of Leviticus, instead of using it as a book to go to sleep by.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I mean, you're right. Everything that's said in the book, all those little minute details, I always make it a point when God repeats himself, I always think about my mom. Whenever she repeated herself, whatever she said the second time, I probably really needed to pay attention to. It was, there's a reason that was
Yeah.
repeated. This is something that I need to know. I think everything in the Bible is something that we need to know, which is why we get to the book of Leviticus. It may seem mundane, as you said, but there's a lot in here. There's a lot in here. A lot of these sin offerings, and why are they giving these sin offerings? And this happens after Exodus. Okay, what are they to do now? This is after, they sinned against God and offered, offerings to this golden calf, had Aaron make this golden calf. And that's another,
Mhm.
this is kind of a side note. That golden calf that was made, why didn't God strike Aaron down for actually acquiescing to what they requested? That's a side note though.
Mm.
Say that again, Khalif.
Why didn't God strike Aaron down for acquiescing and making a golden calf?
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, right off the top of my head, the answer I would give is that Moses, breaks the tablets, right?
Right.
And then, without trying to get into the story, if I'm doing this kind of like watching the movie The Ten Commandments with Charleston Heston, right? He throws down the things and basically says, "Who's on the Lord's side? The Lord's going to destroy you." And then people are coming to it, so he gives a chance of repentance
Mm,
before destroying those that are still obstinate in
good point.
the calf worship. Now I wouldn't say that's exactly accurate. It's just a picture in my head. Whereas we know he actually comes down, breaks the thing, and then uh, grinds the golden calf to powder, which is really cool.
Mm.
And then puts it in the water and then makes them drink the water. So there's a whole lot more to it than that. That's the real quick picture I get in my head. If there's an answer to it,
And
of course,
here's
Moses says, they just handed me this. I threw the thing in the fire, and boom, this calf popped out.
Popped out.
What?
now
That's what shocks me is that
right.
he said that.
Now to that point with Aaron, now we get to the book of Leviticus. Again, what do we do if we sin after the Exodus? Well, here you go. Here's what you do. So God constantly making a way for man to reconcile and to fellowship with him. And that's what you see through this whole book. And that's what you see in the beginning of this book. And I'm beginning
Mhm.
to think in verse 3, the reason that it was mentioned, this thing being done voluntarily, is we're seeing the heart of someone who is coming to do this sacrifice. And to Darius's point from a few videos ago, it's not that you can opt out of this, but the point is you have to come with a willing heart. How do we know this sacrifice is for real? Well, that will be between you and God. God, are you coming with a willing heart to do this sacrifice? Okay, now let's
Mhm.
reconcile. Do this sacrifice exactly as I told you, and this will atone for your sin.
Yeah. And I think if anything, my mention of this is also in the idea that the Israelites are. Let's try to get the picture in our head and maybe make sure we get it right. If you look at a Bible map, right, of the area, they're up in Goshen toward the mouth of the Nile, up at the top of Egypt, what I would call the top of the bottom of Egypt as far as land, heights and stuff. But anyway, Lower Egypt. But they're up there, and they cross through this peninsula and go over to the beach on the east side there. They take the time to go to when the land of Canaan is, northward straight across. A lot quicker to go that way. Of course, the Lord mentions that and says that he doesn't want the people to turn back because of war. But anyway, takes them down through the mountain pass and gets to that beach. And then they have to cross over the Red Sea there into the land of Midian, where the Mount of God is, where Moses was and met God on the mountain, the burning bush, and all that, and takes that time to do that, and then takes this month period of time with Leviticus, when it could have been, people say, the trip there was a couple of weeks, to get to Canaan.
Right.
Now, they may be thinking, you know, in that peninsula or something, because it's been wrongly pointed to as Sinai in the peninsula, right? But anyway, it's not much longer from the land of Midian to go up and get to the Jordan, cross over where Jericho is. But the Lord does take time with the children of Israel. In any way we look at it, he's taking this month time, and then takes more time in the travels. They travel here, they travel there, and finally they get up there, uh, and then the spies get sent in, and and uh, and of course they come back to have a good report. The other 10, have the unbelieving report, and then the Lord says 40 years in the wilderness, and then spends 40 years working on them, from that time. And and I know I want to say anyway, there's a time frame that's mentioned, a date that's mentioned, when around the time when um the spies go in, so we can calculate that whenever we find it, and I believe that's true. I know for sure that it talks about that last day of the 40 years. But anyway, that's just the thought that I'm having from being, that being mentioned before, how the Lord does take time, whatever it is.
Mm.
And yeah, to Darius's point earlier, and I think the point that was being made, and when this came to my attention, was that um we do need to slow down. The Lord is speaking, and the Lord.
That's what's lining the door. Like, you finna sin, you finna do wrong. But sin, again, and again, I think we're gonna talk a little bit about this. We want to think about sin as this thing that that this thing here. But sin in that context is just saying, hey, you finna do something that's wrong, something that's not right, the right thing to do. I
I
don't
don't
think they
think
have a
so.
concept.
I think our abbreviated presentation that we get, because it all is, we're not getting a lot of details from back then, is still telling us the story. The offering that was made, I would say the offering, the sacrifice, the slaughter, to clothe them with coats of skins, is for their sin, Adam and Eve's sin, and it goes through the generations, but it's taught to their children, and God still speaks to them and says, "You've got to offer the right offering. An offering's got to be offered that's right for the sacrifice."
No,
So,
again,
and then it goes into more, but I think we just see little tidbits and snippets, and most most of the offerings in the Genesis are going to be about covenant,
well,
having a covenant.
I would disagree, and I would say to you that and not to be contrarian, and I'll yield here in a second. Let me make this last point. I think we bring in a lot of suppositions into the Genesis account. If the sacrifice was clothing, the covering sin, then there's no need for the blood, right? I mean, to be sprinkled on the altar. We could just take the coats and cover the people. This is not a representation of covering sin. It's a representation of two naked people that need clothes. And the fig leaves doesn't cover everything. I mean, the leaves from the whatever tree doesn't cover everything. That's the strict account. And that's what I said to Khalif earlier. Sometimes we read into the books what's not in there because we're trying to get to Christ. But I would say that God sacrificing this animal was because they needed clothes. That's why, not to cover, not. I mean, yeah, literally covering sin. The fact that they looking at each other naked, but figured. I mean, but there, there is the connotation to me that they need to have on the right things to be covered. That's what I gather from that, and I gather that at some point Adam and Eve had taught Cain and Abel about a worship to God, to get God for God. But I don't believe God is speaking or talking at this point. I don't know the full understanding of it. God could be speaking or talking. I don't know the full understanding of it. All I know is they bring an offering, and it would seem like the connotation that was given to us is that Cain or Abel brought the best,
So why
and
didn't
Abel didn't.
so for Adam and Eve, why didn't he just fashion something better out of leaves? Didn't have to slaughter an animal.
I don't know the answer
I think we do know the answer though.
because the animal is not burnt. There's no animals in Leviticus that don't get burnt, except for the one that's released into the wilderness.
Okay,
So I mean,
answer me this question: what happened to the animal God slaughtered for Adam and Eve?
it was skinned alive.
What happened to it after that?
I don't know.
You're saying it's not burnt. You're
I'm
saying
just saying that means we see an abbreviated account again.
right. I agree.
We see an abbreviated account that later on we see what they're doing, and it's like, oh, apparently. And again, this is where Presbyterians and the Reformed people get this from, is from people that already thought this way. They're looking, a lot of what their confession of faith is looking at commentators saying that this, that, and the other thing happened. They may take it too far at times. That's not what I'm not trying to. We're not trying to, talk about the confession of faith and elaborate on it. So that they get some stuff right is not necessarily bad.
Right.
Is my point too. And again, anyway,
Okay, again, I yield. I don't know. I don't know what a burnt offering is until I read Leviticus. I don't know how. No, I don't know. Even though it's saying Noah had a burnt offering or Abraham had a burnt offering, I don't know that is the same thing.
Right. And I will agree with you. I'm not making the argument that what they did is exactly this. I'm saying the idea of a sacrifice is not foreign. That's all I'm saying. Is that the idea of a blood sacrifice was not foreign at all. You see that from the book of Genesis all the way to Noah and his sons. Clearly, obviously, that's like, where did Balaam come from? He wasn't with Israel. How is he a prophet of God? I'll make the same exact argument. Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. He taught his sons who taught their sons who taught their sons. And at some point, people veered off and did their own thing and decided to abandon God. That doesn't mean everyone did. There was clearly people out there who knew God, because here comes Abraham, right? So clearly there was a group of people who did not just abandon God, and there was a group of people who did. So not all of these things were completely unknown, and it wasn't just arbitrary. They were taught and handed down from generation to generation.
Mm-hmm.
That's my point.
Yeah.
yeah, and I think, what to something you said earlier, uh, I think there's a problem from my perspective, and I've seen it more, I think, now than I have in the past. Is people saying, well, the Bible says a thing, and we try to interpret into it everywhere Christ, but there's nothing wrong with that. Now, there can be something wrong with interpreting the wrong thing into it, and saying, well, Christ is here, and it's pointing to whatever that's not the right thing that we're talking about. So, to a point that was made earlier, it could be that more of Leviticus is dealing with not Christ's sacrifice on the cross to save us from our sins, but something else, how to keep us right with God. But it's still pointing to what Christ did, his work and his all that. Uh, but we're not renewed unto repentance again in this. There's more that accompanies salvation, and I think Leviticus would likely, if we ever get into it, bear that out well, um, as we go through it. What it's talking about through our lives, rather than just what I'm calling a criticism of the idea that everything points to Christ. Christ is the centerpiece of Revelation. So back in the book of Genesis, there are types and figures of Christ throughout that, and our attention is rightly directed all the time toward Christ and how what He's done and what He's doing is fitting in to those places, those metaphors and everything else, and how that touches our hearts and lives. So when, again, like I said a week or two ago, when I say this is all about the gospel of the grace of God in Jesus Christ, it's not just saying, yeah, you need to be saved, because too many so-called, at least, churches do something to that effect, where it's like, if you get somebody saved, that's it, we're done, we're just going to heaven no matter what. And I know y'all have heard it, I've heard it so many times. If that was true, then why didn't God just take us on to heaven right away, just so we could win somebody else so that they could just go to heaven when they die? That's not the point. We've got life to live too, for Christ. We've got to live for the Lord Jesus, and and that's got to enter the equation. As far as, what we're learning, what we're talking about, what we're seeing, and um, but anyway, some of this discussion really goes to also just the way God has revealed himself and the truth through a variety of things. He does this in the Word of God. We also have his revelation in history. Now, how we're going to talk about that, we're probably not going to get into it, but uh, theologians that get into all that stuff, uh, it's something I used to think about when I was a young Christian, just sitting there trying to, whatever, do thought experiments or something and say, why does this happen? Why does that happen? What about this natural phenomenon and so forth? And just, trying to run through it in my head. How is God revealing himself in these different things? Which I don't think is necessarily wrong, because there are illustrations all the time. Christ gives illustrations from nature and stuff like that, that he doesn't explain fully. And but we're supposed to be, to Brother Carly's point from before, we're supposed to meditate on these things. We're supposed to think about these things. We're supposed to chew on these things. The whole idea of expository and exegetical preaching is to bring out what is in the text, because it's concealed in a very brief thing. This is a small book compared to volumes upon volumes that have been written out of this book.
Mhm.
And it can't, are we going to say throw away all those things because they're just all the thoughts of man? A lot of it, stuff in some of them is, but there's plenty that you can read from an author that's going through the book of Leviticus. And the vast majority of what he says is straight out of the book of Leviticus, comparing other scriptures with it and bringing things out and expressing it in a true way without making it scripture. We have scripture in such a concentrated form that we're supposed to spend time filling it out in our minds, our hearts, and our lives. And to uh, if we took what your statement was to a very, very far degree and say, well, just read it for what it says, that's it. no more. Can't then Brother Darius, you wouldn't be talking very much, if we said that. We'd say, no, we just have to say that verse. Just read that verse. That was it. You can't really read into anything,
No,
but
I,
yet
I,
we do. So you don't believe that to the nth degree is what I'm
I,
saying.
I
And I
guess
don't
my
think we should.
statement is I believe that we should always take the value first of what it says. I guess if I made that statement, that may clarify my thought. There is the way I look at Leviticus, and I think I said this. If you go back, if this didn't get lost in, when we lost some of the video here, you go back and listen to what I said initially about the Book of Leviticus. After Khalif said, I tend to want. Khalif said that he wants to look at the book, from this Christian perspective, and I said, well, I agree. So I agree that there is some types there that we can definitely pull out. But my first go at it would be to look at the book as it is. How did the reader see it initially? And I think that I'm still saying the same thing about Genesis or whatever other books we just mentioned here, is that I would like to look at them at face value first. There may be other things there, but if we get the face value wrong, then we didn't get the types that may be associated with them wrong. I think we got Adam and Eve or Cain and Abel wrong. This has and Adam and Eve wrong. This has nothing to do with that I know of. Now, again, I like the fact that you talk about this concentrated version of of human knowledge and understanding from God's perspective or from man's perspective about God. Uh, 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 I love that idea of this concentrated, and then it has to be diluted for us to fully understand its effects. I love that, but I would say to you, Don, that um, that there are places where we interject where interjection is not there. Now, it mentions burnt offerings and peace offerings, for example, with Noah. But I don't have the full understanding of that. And it cannot be in view of what we see in Leviticus. Other than that, then why have Leviticus? If this knowledge that is already there, then why do we need the book of Leviticus? It's because that there is a difference. And again, is Noah a priest that he could make an offering? And this offering is considered of a sweet savior under God. Now, again, we'll talk about what that statement means later, because again, it's gonna come up here in Leviticus. But I think that there's more to it. I agree, but I think there's more to it, not in the direction of they knew something about this, but more to it into that people did what they thought was right. They didn't know what was right. They just did what they thought was a good thing to do. Not that God told them to do anything.
So
And he said,
I'm agreeing with you. I'm just saying that these things were passed down at some point. It may have been lost why this was being done, which is where you get pagans offering sacrifices to idols. Because at some point sacrifices were being made to God. Maybe the people didn't understand the full scope of why this was being done. And then at some point, when they forgot about God, they still kept the tradition of these sacrifices. The sacrifices were still going on. To that point, the children of Israel, they weren't doing sacrifices in Egypt. You are correct. But there were sacrifices being done by different people groups. So sacrifice itself is not uncommon or unknown. Now, the details of what God wants done is a whole different thing. To that point, I agree with you. There's a point to this. God is pointing them to something. God is showing them something. Well, what does this actually mean? And I think verse 3 is a hinge point for me for what this all means. Verse 3 in Leviticus chapter 1, where he talks about the person bringing this voluntary. Not that that's the only thing in there or the only thing that means anything, but I think this is, again, showing the heart of this. These are things that are required. But in these things that are required, this has to be something in you to do before the Lord, which is true worship. I'll end with that thought.
no, I hear you.
To kind of elaborate on that, if I can, for just saying, without repeating myself much, I think that in the very beginning, you've got Adam and Eve. Adam walked with God. Adam and Eve walked with God in the garden. They talked with Him from day to day for however long, we don't know. People estimate, and we tend to imagine it was the Monday after that they decided to eat of you know the fig tree. But anyway, the um the fact is that they walked with God and they talked with God. And then again, when I read where God is talking to Cain, I get I look at it from a different perspective than this normally, but it does still strike me. God spoke to Cain in his in Cain's anger, in his near murderous rage. Maybe he wasn't that mad at that moment, but he was heading in that direction. And God speaks to him. And God speaks to the king of Egypt during Abraham's time. I believe it was that, or it was Abimelech, one of the two, speaks to him in the dream. Um, I just get the two mixed up too much. But God is speaking to people more and less as time goes, it seems, too. But he's still, openly to them. And to the point here, when they get to the mount, and God, it seems, begins to speak, the people say, we don't want God to speak to us. You go and find out what God has to say, and then you come tell us. Then we'll do whatever God says to do. But we don't want to listen, or we don't want to, face God directly, or something like that. You get the people's choice not to. I remember seeing that in a movie where it seemed like they were trying to portray that all the people were hearing God at one time, and then shortly after that they send Moses off and say, "We don't want to hear. You tell us. Give us that intermediary." But anyway, I think that more was told to them toward the beginning. More, Adam probably knew more than we want to give him credit for. Well, especially a lot of people, but even more maybe than I give him credit for. When you come to the Exodus, Leviticus, and all that, where it goes into this elaborate thing where God is establishing the people of Israel as a witness to Him, He's doing more than than He was doing during the time of Abraham himself. Paul speaks of this and says, there's this time of promises given. This is the gospel given to the entire world in Abraham. All right. And he lays that out and then says, and the law coming in later cannot disannul this. This is, to me, that's kind of putting that importance on that. There's something we need to recognize about how God dealt with Abraham, and that God is not trying to give us the ceremonies of the law for our redemption and salvation.
That's a good point.
It's elaborating a relationship first. It it it's coming out of Egypt. That's salvation. Then the entire thing after that is the relationship. So the reason why there's priests in the people of Israel is God is establishing a difference between the holy things and the, what's the word for it? Just the profane. There's a difference between holy and profane things, and nothing necessarily wrong with a profane thing. It's just like a regular thing. Your regular everyday lives. You go off to a job, you're not taking an animal sacrifice up to the boss and say, "We're starting with this here," and they don't do any of that. They just go to work. They plow their fields. They go feed their sheep and all that. And when they come to the tabernacle, from the willingness, from recognizing their sin, whatever it is, whatever that we should be getting into at some point here, that's that relationship with God. And God is showing, and He's making Israel a witness to the nations as to what that looks like. The holy things, the regular things of life, what happens, how you deal with those different things. And that's the way I'm looking at it. That's the way I see the law. The law enters in uh, because of because of sin, of course, and all that. But the law enters in this area to show Israel as a special chosen people of God, to show who God is, shows glory to the world, to draw other people to them. And Israel loses sight of that constantly, is the other thing we see. And I think that is not necessarily intended to be, but does illustrate our lives too, how that the same thing happens with us. I'm going to leave it at that, though. We can all elaborate on that.
Don, you've just schooled me to a word that I've used and didn't realize the depth of the definition. Profane, irrelevant to anything sacred. It doesn't always mean something bad. Now, in the definition, you do get bad things, but depending on the context, you are correct. Profane doesn't always just mean bad. Sometimes it's just something secular, not set apart for a holy purpose. I've been schooled. I've been learned up. But back to Leviticus chapter 1.
Yeah.
And to Darius's point, this is where I do agree. The reason all of these things are being explained is because the children of Israel have no idea what's going on here. They don't like this sacrifice, this offering. What does all of this mean? Why are we doing this? What is the purpose of this? And I think this is where you really do begin to get the separation. And you see this throughout the history of Israel. You get the separation from those people who actually love God and the people who are just going through the motions, i.e., you get a Saul and then you get a David. Well, David had some questionable things, but you do see the difference between a man who seems to be going through the motions. At one point, Saul seemed solid, and then he just completely went off the rails. And even though David went off the rails in a lot of ways, he still always seemed genuinely after God's own heart. And I think that's part of the separation that we tend to get to here in the book of Leviticus, as was pointed out by Darius earlier on. This is where you get to the relation between the children of Israel and God. How do I now maintain this fellowship? How is this fellowship maintained with God? What do I do to maintain this fellowship? How do I keep all of this in order? Meat offerings and burnt offerings and sacrifices and sprinkling of blood.
Yeah.
Now, how far along are we? I've got an hour on the second part, but I don't know how long we were before we got cut off.
We started at about 8:00.
Okay.
It's 9:30 or
8:30.
10:30. I leave time. And
Are we going to get into anything are we going to get past Leviticus chapter 1, or do we have more to say there?
Well, I didn't think we should start Leviticus 1 today, but I think we definitely should be starting next week.
Next week.
I think
Okay.
we need to get in and start going through, and then I think some of the questions that we had, or some of the thoughts or places where we differ, I think will come out.
Mm-hmm. I was just thinking that too.
Yeah.
And to your point, I think everything we've covered so far in these introductions is actually important to answering a lot of those questions, like getting that out of the way, the time of the book and why they were doing this. What did they know? What didn't they know?
And then I also like to point out, and this in agreement with you, but even though I think I still disagree with your overall point, but the book of Leviticus is talking about what relates to the Levites. So what were their duties as it pertains to these offerings? Like what had happened? Whatever was going to happen, these are the rules to what needs to happen in the order in which they happen. So the book is pertaining or relating to the Levites, so the priest and what was necessary to get done. Maybe pointing to the fact that the people already had an idea of offerings, and they just didn't have. Again, they just didn't have the right ways of executing that. So I understand your point. I disagree though. I do think if there is some overarching understanding of offerings, we don't get a insight into that. We just see them doing it.
Yeah. And it was if there was if there was understanding, it was probably limited. Here's something that, just thinking through this, the people had to trust God and do exactly what he said. So you had to believe God, do what he said, whatever your role was with the sacrifice and offering. But it was the priest's job to attend to the altar and sprinkle the blood.
True.
I think that's why we get Exodus before any, Leviticus, and it's not all mentioned in between too. Is that again? We see Aaron and Moses, or Moses mainly, being spoken to by God, and he's relaying to the people for whatever reason. Like I said, there's different things that come in there, but there's an establishing of Moses in the book of Exodus. So if you read through the book of Exodus, you get these different stories over and over again that the people of Israel, the children of Israel, are being reminded by God. He's going to speak through Moses to them. And then when Moses is giving all these little details out in Leviticus and about the tabernacle and all that later on, than that, they're listening to the point that y'all just said. It's like they're listening and saying, yes, this is from God, and not, hopefully not arguing with them too much, as they were through the book of Exodus, and apparently do at some other points too. But goodness, I'm just not as familiar with the first parts here as I want to be able to talk about that and where they actually go. I might have to read Calvin's Harmony on the first 5 books of the Bible.
Darius said we're coming out the closet this episode.
Yeah. But you just know it. I just don't spend a lot of time studying these things from the Calvinistic point of view, and is Calvinistic. I think that, in my opinion, but I think that the reality is the children of Israel come out of Egypt. I don't know that they have ever made a sacrifice in their life, and as soon as they get out, they make a calf to worship an image, and they bring what the Bible calls a burnt offering and a peace offering.
You
And
say to the calf? I'm
yeah,
trying to remember. Okay.
yeah.
Wonder where they got that from.
Again, I imagine they got it from the Egyptians.
And I wonder where the Egyptians got that from.
Yes,
Again,
that's the strange thing. Is I'm reading through it again. It's like it seems to me they quit sacrificing, or didn't sacrifice anything during that time. Just because I don't see it anywhere there.
Maybe they
we
did. Maybe
and
they did, and it just wasn't.
and the way that Moses spoke to Pharaoh and said, "We're going to offer these sacrifices that are an abomination. Y'all would kill us if we did it in the land. We've got to get out of here." So I don't know whether or not
I
the Egyptians were sacrificing anything at that point, other than the little children.
know that Moses knows exactly what he's talking about as it pertains to sacrificing to the Lord. Not until God exposes. I think that man just did what they thought was good, and that was it. And it was accepted. I don't know that man understood the good and bad of it. I mean, we don't see Abraham throughout his life making sacrifices? You know, did he do it yearly? Did he did it once a month? Did he do it daily? Like, how often did Abraham sacrifice? I know there's not enough information there, but are we saying that if we was to dilute the concentrate here, that we would say that Moses, or I mean that Moses or Aaron, or Abraham was sacrificing daily? I mean, we know there was some sacrifice, because when he told his wife, Sarah, that he was going to sacrifice, she ain't question him.
Right.
They sacrificed enough for Isaac to say, "Hey, where's the ram? Where's the sacrifice?"
Mm-hmm.
You know. So I know they did it enough, but okay, where in the Bible is a ram ever sacrificed other than at that point?
Right. And
I mean,
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I think we're actually saying the same thing. Sacrifices were done and understood, but to what degree did they understand the sacrifice? What about this did they actually know? And I think it's very possible that they didn't know much about sacrifices. Some people sacrificed, it was done. Maybe they understood something about it, maybe they didn't understand. But the idea of sacrifice itself wasn't just completely foreign. It wasn't like just this odd thing to sacrifice to God or to sacrifice to an idol.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, check Job out. So I'll leave it at that.
I forgot about Job.
Oldest book in the Bible, right? Sometime, I don't know. I imagine him just before Abraham somewhere, but I'm not sure. Um, I want to say I found one of the Temanites in the book of Genesis somewhere, though. So
Yeah, and Job 1:5.
yeah,
no,
Job's
he's talking Job
he's offering
42:8,
burnt offerings for his children in case they
7 rams.
sinned, right?
So he's offering it for sin.
No, Job 42:8, 7 rams.
Yeah, so to that point, I think this kind of goes back to what I'm saying is I'm not saying that there was an overall, like they understood the depths of what was going on as God laid things out in the book of Leviticus. But I'm not sure that, these things were just completely and utterly foreign. Like they had never seen this before. Sacrifice, what is that?
Yeah. You know what just occurred to me is that and I may be way off on this, but think about it. Y'all can tell me if you think differently. But prayer is mentioned throughout the Bible. But when were the people taught what to pray? When they came to Jesus and said, "Teach us to pray," and Jesus gives a outline of prayer, if you will. And but where else? Where else are we told what to pray, how to address God?
Hmm.
We see some prayers. We hear some prayer. There's some prayers recorded in the Bible, but that to me speaks to that. We know about prayer. We know about sacrifices. We don't get all the details.
I didn't grow up in church and I knew about praying. It was just
Mm.
something that was passed down, but I mean, obviously I didn't really understand.
That I think is an illustration of it. Somebody whoever uh, gave you some knowledge of prayer had some knowledge, but not the right or the most perfect knowledge.
Right.
All of that, and that's again, it can be lost so fast. It's within generations easily. Um, don't want to go off on tangents on that right now that we could, um, but yeah, it's just we lose things from generation to generation for a variety of reasons, and it's saddening, you know. But
I don't think this is too much of a tangent. I think it's all relevant because I think all of these
No,
things,
I think so too.
yeah, I think all
I,
of these things will be hashed out just like Darius said we will get the answer going through this book. Like at some point, maybe I'll be like, oh, you know what? I'm wrong. I could see now that what Darius was
I
saying was
fully expect
exactly
you to
right.
get that.
Well, you see, just not to go far off there at all, but you see in Abraham, Abraham knew God, right? Abraham was the friend of God,
Right.
and he lived 175 years. He lived 15 years into the lives of Esau and Jacob,
Yep.
right? He dwelt among them. He was there to teach them. Uh, but look at Esau and Jacob. Look at their lives, you know, and look at what they did until uh, we don't know exactly what happened with Esau, but specifically Jacob. Jacob, eventually turns his life over to the Lord. But what he did before that, even with the influence of Abraham, uh, it's just think of our children and grandchildren. It's like, what is going to happen? What kind of influence can we have to hopefully get them on the right path, the right direction? And we have to constantly be thinking about that, constantly be, I don't know, trying to be the best instructors that we can be to those that don't have that instruction, you know.
You can lead a horse
And
to water, but you can't make him drink.
hmm and there's just so much. It's got to become a part of those people's lives too. It's got to become a part of the children and then the grandchildren and stuff like that. Just talking about your own family, but if you're dealing with somebody else and somebody comes to Christ, and the only way they're going to learn these kind of things is to fall in love with Christ and His Word themselves, so that they go into it. Because otherwise, it's just going to be something they heard from somebody a little bit. Maybe they care about it or not.
This is where Leviticus is relevant. What the children of Israel are doing and their sacrifices, these things are different from what's being done out in the world. I mean, at this time, people were sacrificing children on altars
hmm
to idols.
This is
The
where
children of
that
Israel
willing,
are doing something completely different.
verse comes in.
Exactly.
You have got to have a willing heart to get into this too. Otherwise, it becomes Isaiah chapter 1.
Bingo.
We don't
You're
want God says, I don't even want any of these sacrifices that I told you to make.
you going through the
But because I
motions.
didn't tell you to make it. I
Right.
told I told you to get right with me, and then you make the sacrifice. Something like that anyway.
No, I think that's I think
He,
that's all relevant. And this is where the
he
relational
says that in Isaiah chapter 1.
111,
He goes,
Isaiah 111.
111, he says, well, that's not that.
It
It's
is
verse
that's
16.
well, that's where he starts. It starts at
Yeah,
111
yeah, I know.
and then it
But verse 16, he goes, wash you, make you clean, put away the evil of your doings from before mine eyes. Cease to do evil, learn to do well, seek judgment, relieve the oppressed, judge the fatherless, plead for the widow. Come now and let us reason together, saith the Lord. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they be red like crimson, they shall be as wool. And this is where I was getting to. If ye be willing and obedient, ye shall eat of the good of the land.
you notice a theme in those verses. Love God, love your neighbor.
Yep.
On these two hang all the law and the prophets.
Mm-hmm.
If a person loved God, then what the instructions Moses is giving right here, easy money. Oh, sacrifice? Done. Tell me where to go. Where do I make this sacrifice? Here? Done.
Yeah.
You know,
And to add to that, no, the first thing he says right after all that explanation is, wash you, make you clean. Get right with God first. You know, people talk all the time. Be a good person. Be a good person to each other. Well, that's the second commandment. Love thy neighbor
There
as
you
thyself.
go. Good discussion. Hopefully, this leads you to read your Bible some more, study some more, and figure out for yourself what these things mean and what's going on. None of us are infallible. We all have questions. We have opinions. Some of them may be right, some of them may be wrong. Your only hedge of protection is to read and study your own Bible. Y'all know what it is. Stay frosty, people.